We're going to begin with a question that I'd like to pose to the panel today about the omnibus spending bill, which is before the House, which was released on Monday night. First of all, I'm wondering if you've had a chance to read the 1,500 pages, if you found anything in it that you might find good or bad, and how you're planning to vote. And Congressman Huelskamp, would you like to begin?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I do appreciate you joining and moderating this again. I am planning no. I'll admit I haven't read the whole bill. We found plenty in there that's of concern to me. One thing to note is the bottom line that's not in there. When this is adopted, we will still have a $600 billion deficit in the current fiscal year, and that's just simply not good enough.
Any other members care to weigh in on this?
Well, one thing that I think is glossed over is that it preserves each and every single pro-life rider that has been that we've had over the years. So there's been no retrenchment at all on those issues, and hopefully, as the Senate changes next year, we can actually advance that agenda as well.
Okay, I'd like to turn to the audience here. Yes, Dustin. And we have microphones this month, so please use that to ask your question.
Hi, Dustin Siggins, LifeSiteNews.com. Speaking of pro-life, H.R. 7 is being marked up right now, and kind of seems like any time Republicans do anything, whether it's the very conservative RSC budget or the moderate Paul Ryan budget, you're going to get hammered. Congressman Franks got beat up last year, 2012, and this year for H.R. 7 and other pro-life legislation. Is there a plan to move forward with this pro-life legislation in the House, as happened last year with other legislation? And with even when you get pushback, are you going to plan on pushing back against the media, which often makes Republicans look extreme, even for popular legislation, such as H.R. 7?
I'll try to answer that as well. Again, I apologize on my voice here, but a number of us have had a concerted effort in the last few days to add sponsors to H.R. 7. As you note, it will be marked up, and hopefully with some more sponsors and a good action, we can encourage leadership to bring that to the floor. But more importantly, as Congressman Harris notes, it needs to be those kind of things in the appropriations process. And until we have the extra appropriations bill on the floor in which we can offer those kind of things, and a lot of that's an HHS budget, then that's our difficulty. I have yet to have a chance to vote on that in my 3+ years here in Congress.
Well, I'm going to try to have a sexy voice like Tim. The fact that it's being held that it's being heard in Judiciary Committee today, I think tells you that there's a movement to advance it. I think it's going to pass the Judiciary Committee and it's going to go to the House floor. So I think the fact that we're having a hearing, in fact, some of us are in that committee, so I'll be going in and out voting on amendments and things throughout our conversations with conservatives today.
Next question. Yes, front row.
A bipartisan report, Saxby Chambliss signed off on it, addressing Benghazi, saying that there was no military assets that could have been moved, that the talking points that were changed were the result of intel community, and that the attacks could have been prevented based on some of the intelligence that was out there. I'm curious to hear what a number of you have spoken out on the issue of Benghazi, what your thoughts are on that report.
Well, I would say that it's there's never a shortage of bipartisanship when we don't have all the facts. And I think it's interesting that the administration has been able to, for nearly a year and a half, to cover up, to obfuscate, to prevent us from getting the facts, to polygraphing intelligence personnel to make sure they're not talking to members of Congress, to instructing State Department people not to talk to Jason Chaffetz when he came over. And also military people being shipped around and not talking and being forthcoming with Congress. So I'll feel a lot more comfortable with answering what was available and what wasn't when we have people come forward honestly with the truth about what was available and what wasn't available, and what special ops people were in Libya, were not in Libya, were close to Libya, and we're not allowed to go in and assist. So once we get all of that information, once this administration stops keeping the roadblock up to the truth, then you'll see a bipartisan report that gives you real facts and not opinions.
I would add to that, and I would point out that Mr. Gohmert and I both have been in Libya within the last month, as Mrs. Bachmann, who I see in my peripheral vision, has arrived, and along with Robert Pittenger. So we have some on-the-ground information that's probably the newest, and some of this I'm not going to talk about here today, but I would like to just point this thing out, that if you would go back to Robert Gates's book, when he says that Hillary Clinton said that she took a position against the surge for political reasons because she was running for office, and that the President Obama alluded somewhat, I don't think he used the word obliquely, but not as emphatically, to the same thing. When you look at the fact that Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, pushed 44 votes on the floor of the House of Representatives, almost as many votes as we have had on Obamacare, that were designed to underfund or undermine our troops, you can see that foreign policy is driven by political considerations. Now, people that know that ought to then look at the information that came out of this administration immediately after September 11th attack in Benghazi. You can't wonder whether there were political considerations or not, but here's what I know. They knew that it was a planned, orchestrated attack within at least 3 hours. The reports yesterday were within about 12 to 15 minutes. And you should also know that this administration came to this Congress and briefed members of Congress in a classified setting. And you should also know that I can't tell you what they said, except that they told us the same lies that they told America on Sunday TV.
I think it's becoming more and more clear with Benghazi that the administration looks very flat-footed and certainly inept and incompetent when it came to Benghazi, because nothing has refuted the initial reporting that showed that in the entire year in 2012 leading up to the horrific tragic attack on September 11th, there were multiple warnings to the State Department of the inadequacy of security on the compound in Benghazi. That was clearly known. There was much activity. There were threats of retaliation that came up because we had taken a strike on al-Libi, and so there were threats that there would be activity and there would be assassinations. So the question is, why in the world wasn't the military repositioned in such a way that they would be near the hellholes and the hot spots where we could potentially have a problem? This isn't looking through the rearview mirror or Monday morning quarterbacking. This is where if you are a competent commander-in-chief and if you are a competent Secretary of State, you appreciate the risks and you act accordingly. This is a clear example where both the Secretary of State, Clinton, and the President of the United States, Barack Obama, did not act wisely on the information that was clearly in front of their face. We also know the people who've come to testify before committees, people that we've talked to in the public, no one talked about a video being the cause of what happened in Benghazi. It wasn't the cause of what happened in Benghazi. In fact, we have military officers who've testified that they briefed the president afterwards. They said it wasn't, and yet this false narrative continued. So there's three real problems that still need to be addressed that aren't addressed. Number one is, why did Secretary of State Clinton fail in her job as the head of the State Department to safely protect the people in Benghazi when they knew that there was a problem? Britain got out of Benghazi. They got out of Libya. Where was the President of the United States during the entire attack? We still don't know where he was, what he said, what he did. There's a big blank. And then third, why was the false narrative tried to be sold to the American public? They can't stand behind it anymore. So I think today more than ever, I think that Benghazi stands as the symbol of incompetence of the Obama administration, and it's a high hurdle that Secretary of State Clinton has to overcome in the future. She needs to respond to the American people for her failures as Secretary of State.
So I haven't seen the report, but you allude to it, that it says that all the military assets that could have been deployed were employed or deployed. But that flies in the face of what we uncovered in the Oversight Committee. Mark Thompson, he's the leader of the FEST, the Foreign Emergency Support Team, the team that's designed to save embassies. He was at his desk when this happened, and he asked his supervisor if he could respond, and they told him not to respond, not to mobilize the team. So while it's true that he wouldn't have gotten there in time, nobody knew that at the time. And he was told to basically to stand down. So I hope the report takes into account all the facts that we've uncovered in the Oversight Committee.
And another consideration also is the unanswered questions of was this administration trying to resecure weapons in Libya that this administration had provided to rebels, and were there American assets in Libya who were reviewing sites to store such weapons if they were being gathered for potential sending to Syria. There are just a lot of unanswered questions, and until those questions are answered, then we're not going to have the full report, although I'm sure the New York Times will continue to give us definitive answers when they didn't even know which questions to ask.
Let's take the next question. Yes, also in the front row.
Yeah, back on the...
and your name and affiliation.
I'm sorry. I'm Susan Cornwell with Reuters. Back on the omnibus, maybe for Representative Huelskamp, how much opposition do you think there'll be to it today? And assuming that you can't stop it, does the fight over spending cuts stop now? Or where does it move to? Does it move to the debt ceiling, or what's the next step?
Certainly, excuse me, I certainly like to see some others answer this as well. And again, I apologize, I'm fighting a terrible cold, but I'm not for sure what the opposition will be. A lot of outside groups have expressed their opposition to this. We'll continue to dig through it. Again, it's 1,582 pages. It's about 40,000 lines, and plus the supporting documents. So the more we go through it, the more we uncover. But again, it's a massive spending bill, and it certainly we've raised a concern in conservatives about big bills like this, whether it's Obamacare and such, and some real concerns about throwing that out in 3 days, and hopefully, I mean, the firm promise in Republican conference has been, we'll finish this, then we're going to go to regular order. I sincerely hope so.
I don't think there's going to be a lot of opposition. I think the same people who voted against the budget deal are going to be the people that are going to vote against the bill today. I do find it fascinating that the bill today violates the pledge to America that Republicans made 3 years ago. I find it fascinating that we complain about big bills like what's just said when it's the Democrats that are in charge of Congress, but we love big bills when we're in charge of Congress. And what we always tend to tell the American people is that we can manage the chaos a little bit better than the other side can manage the chaos. And I think that is why we have a 10% approval rating, because we seem to make promises to our constituents back home, but we come here and we violate those promises to the American people. So that's what's of concern to me. I think the fight right now that you're going to see in the Republican Party, I think the cast has been, die has been cast for the next year on budget fights. I think the next fight is going to be about a vision. Who has a vision for the future of America? Republicans right now think that all we have to do is talk about how bad the Obama economy is and how bad Obamacare is, and we're going to win in 2014. The reality is that we did that in 2012. We talked about how bad the economy was, and we lost the presidency, and we lost the Senate, and we lost the House if you look at the number of people who voted for the House. So just being against Obama is not a vision for winning electoral victories in the future. But being for something, letting know the American people what we're for, and I think what this group hopefully will be doing, what conservatives in the House is, will be providing the vision that America will get behind for 2014. If we cannot win in 2014 the Senate, we cannot win in 2016 the White House. So that's really going to be the internal struggle of the Republican Party, is are we just going to be the party that says, hey, the other side is worse than we are, or are we going to show why our side is actually better for the American people, for the public? Are we going to stand with people and stop standing with big business? And I think that's going to be the internal struggle that you will see over the next year. And whichever side is victorious in that struggle, if it's the pro-big business side, then you will see once again electoral defeat for the Republican Party.
I could add one ironic vignette that occurred this morning on the House floor. Congressman Keith Rolfes had a blown-up picture of Ronald Reagan with the 8-inch omnibus appropriation bill, giving it back to the Congress and saying that the Congress should not send me any more of these. Right behind Congressman Rolfes as he spoke was an 8-inch omnibus document that was about to be taken up by the House today, for what it's worth.
One other comment about the appropriations. I mean, we're flexible. We're open to fixing things as we go along. You know, for example, if this administration decided that they wanted or needed money to get people who have been involved in Benghazi, who need to get here to talk to us instead of being polygraphed every 30 days to keep them from talking to us, then I'm sure that we would appropriate money like that to work on that, and I'm sure we could get bipartisan accord. So it just depends on what the issue is, but I'm sure you'll see a willingness to work with the administration when they stop scaring people that work for them. And when I say that, I'm saying that with personal context from intelligence and former intelligence people that said they've never been so scared as the last year scared of this administration because they had knowledge of things that went on in Africa.
I'll add that this is no time to duck in a foxhole. This is the time for the Republicans to lead.
I want to add one thing, if you'll let me.
Yes, please.
You'll hear the refrain from some Republicans that the omnibus spends less than the Ryan budget from a few years ago, but it's an apples to oranges comparison because the Ryan budget included mandatory spending reforms. The omnibus obviously doesn't include those reforms. So voting for the Ryan budget a few years ago doesn't mean you need to vote for this bill today.
Okay, next question. Jonathan? Wait for the mic, please.
So Representative Labrador mentioned the groups, Club for Growth, or was it Representative Hulskamp? Club for Growth and Heritage Action, Tea Party Patriots, basically all of them have come out very strongly against this omnibus. But you all concede that it's going to pass and probably fairly easily. Are the outside groups losing influence as the speaker speaks out against them? And I wonder if they've lost influence with any of you.
You know, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what influence the outside groups have. If you look at my record with some of the outside groups, it's average. It's not great, and I still consider myself a conservative. I do find it ironic that the speaker spoke out against the outside groups for, speaking about a bill that apparently they hadn't read, according to the speaker. But yet, when we came back from our Christmas break, there were a bunch of members of Congress that had no idea what they had voted for before they went on vacation. They had no idea that they had voted to cut the COLA on the military. They had no idea that actually military people were treated worse than federal employees. So I think what the speaker should be worrying about is whether his members have read the bills and stop worrying about what the outside groups have done. I think the Tea Party movement and the conservative movement in America gave the speaker his speakership. And I think it's time for us to be grateful for what some of these outside groups have done, even though, for example, with Heritage, I only have a 78% ranking, and I'm sure to the chagrin of many people. But I'm still grateful for the work that Heritage does, because it tries to advance the conservative movement and conservative ideas for America. So instead of worrying internally about what the outside groups are doing to the Republican Party, I think we should be grateful that because of groups like Tea Party Patriots, Freedom Works, and Heritage, we actually have a conservative majority in the House of Representatives, because we would have never been able to stop the Obama agenda if Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House.
Do any other members care to comment?
Well, I just point out that those conservative groups that warned of the perils of Obamacare and warned that unprecedented spending would do enormous long-term damage to the nation's economy and would not produce happy years for this nation, have been proven exactly right by the test of time. The question is, has that enhanced their credibility among the American people? And I suspect that it has. Their credibility was high in 2010 when we saw one of the biggest shifts in Congress in American history, a net shift of 63 U.S. House seats, 6 U.S. Senate seats, 19 state legislatures, 6 governors, around 700 legislative seats. Now those groups have been proven exactly right in their warnings, and I suspect that that will enhance their credibility in the upcoming election.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I'm a 90% with Heritage, and it's amazing to me a group as fine as Heritage could be wrong 10% of the time.
and I'll just clarify, that's Heritage Action. Yes, in the back there.
And I would add that when I'm at Walmart shopping, when I'm at Sportsman's Warehouse, when I'm at Murdoch's, which is a farm store in Wyoming, and people come up to me, which they do regularly, and say, this is what we're for, this is what we want you to do, and we like what you're doing, that's the score that matters to me.
Yes, Mike. Please state your name and affiliation.
Mike Memley with the LA Times. Over the past year, we've talked a lot about the Williamsburg Accord and its role for the year. You're all going to be heading to Cambridge in a couple of weeks, and I'm wondering if thought about what a Cambridge Accord to look like, or does the budget deal take some of the energy out of that kind of need?
Congressman Jordan?
And I'll go real quick because Raul covered it. We want to paint a vision that's going to help American families, help American people. And I would say 4 broad categories jump to mind, or are first in mind. Number one, what's our alternative to this terrible thing called Obamacare? How are we going to make health care work better for American families, better for American people, and better for American business owners? Number one. Number two, what kind of tax reform can we actually bring forward that will improve the environment and create an environment more conducive to job creation and job growth? Number three, let's actually help the poor. I mean, think about the Senate's debating the 13th extension of unemployment compensation benefits, the 13th in 5 years. Because the first 12, the first 12 didn't work, but the 13th one, that'll be the magic one. That'll actually fix things. Why don't we actually do things, reform the welfare packages, work closely with Heritage on a welfare reform package that would actually help poor families get to the American dream and get a better standard of living and move on to a better life. And then finally, something we've worked with a number of Republicans on who are sitting on this panel, and a number of Democrats, and something we could actually maybe get across the finish line that most Americans want us to get across the finish line, and that's dealing with the issue of privacy. Americans are a little nervous about their government watching everything they do. They want to protect this country, but they're nervous about that. So those are 4 big issues where we should come forward with the vision, and those are 4 things that help every single family in this country. So it's real clear. Raul had it exactly right. When we go to Cambridge, we want to talk about that vision, and not just talk about it, but actually put legislation out there, vote on it, pass it, talk about it, and tell the American people, if you elect us and you give us 6 seats in the Senate, these are the kind of things we're going to put into practice. And the reason we're going to do it is because it helps you. Not big business, not people in Washington. It helps you. Plain and simple.
And I would encourage LA Times and other newspapers, media outlets to begin asking the question about the Democrats' retreat. Do you think you'll be able to figure out what you have been doing so terribly wrong that causes you to have to come try to extend unemployment benefits after you have had the White House and the Senate? And at least for 4 years, you had control of both the House and the Senate. What have you been doing so terribly wrong that keeps you from getting employment going where you don't need to keep begging for extended unemployment benefits? Why don't? And have you considered working with Republicans to create new jobs instead of just trying to continue people on the road to dependence to the government?
I think Jim has it exactly right, that our message needs to be about what are the 3-4 simple things that we can communicate to the American public, why our vision will make their lives better than what they currently have. They want to hear that from us. He's exactly right. But I think when we go to Cambridge, we also need to also look at pitfalls, things that we should not do this year that would hurt our message going forward. One thing that we have to be careful is that everything that we do helps the working people of the United States. And there's something that is probably even disagreement on this panel as well as within our Congress and certainly within the Republican Party, and it's how will we deal with this issue of amnesty for illegal aliens. Every time this issue has come forward, it's remarkable. The American people have been pretty clear about where their position is at on this issue. And the question is, what will we do about it as a conference? We need to talk about that issue. We need to deal with that issue because I think the voters will be very strong on that issue come this fall. So whether it's positives or whether it's negatives, we have to address it head on and come up with a unified vision at Cambridge.
And I don't want to see us just come up with a vision. I want to see us devote considerable floor time in this calendar year to implementing that vision, debating that vision, giving everyone a chance to discuss that vision.
Congressman King, and then we'll go to the next question.
And also just supplement Mrs. Bachmann's statement, and there have been at least 3 times in this past legislative year that there had been an intense immigration discussion that has been presented in such a way that those who disagreed with those who presented it had to wait way to the back of the line to try to talk to the empty room about changing their mind. We don't need that to happen either in Cambridge. We need to have, if there's going to be a discussion behind closed door amongst our Republican conference family, it needs to be set up with equal opportunity for both sides of that discussion to air this thing out. And I'd like to keep it inside those doors, not out in the press, because every day that we discuss immigration, that helps Barack Obama change the topic from Obamacare. And if you wonder what he's doing when he presents minimum wage and the unemployment extensions and the immigration issue, that is changing the topic from Obamacare. If he has one job to do in 2014, it would be tell us how you're going to figure out how to clean up this mess you have on Obamacare.
I want to add, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
There are 2 issues that Republicans need to focus on: ending corporate welfare and protecting civil liberties. President Obama has failed the American people on these issues, and Republicans should take advantage.
Randy?
Yes, Randy Foreman with Newsplace. Speaking of immigration, yes, speaking of immigration, question for Congressman Steve King. After President Obama's Uncle Omar's DUI arrest in Framingham, Massachusetts, you cut a web video in which you invited Uncle Omar to appear before the House Judiciary Committee. Given the recent developments in the case where the president has had to backtrack on his relationship with his uncle, will you be making a renewed push for Uncle Omar to appear before Congress this year?
It almost sounds like a constituent request, Randy. That's a worthy topic to take up with the chairman of the full committee and the subcommittee, and I think I might have that opportunity in the next hour. I think it would be very good for the American people to see drunken Uncle Omar testify before the Judiciary Committee, and maybe even Auntie Onyango, who lived on welfare illegally in the United States for a good number of years as well. It looks like if you're an Obama friend, you're exempt from the law, and that's something this Congress should examine. Thank you.
Second row right here. Yes.
In your perspectives on the Farm Bill. I know the dairy issue still needs to be worked out, but a lot of the taxpayer groups are disappointed that there aren't some bigger reforms on farm subsidies, and so I wanted your perspective on that.
Congressman Hilskamp, are you going to take?
I was going to say a policy that
Congressman King, I think, would
He's on the
address that.
conference. It does roll down this way. I happen to be a conferee, and so let's just speak to this extent that there's not a lot of dialogue coming out of the principal negotiators at this point. Most of it is things that we pick up from the press, little morsels that we add up to try to get a picture of the jigsaw puzzle. I would remind people that agriculture came forward a year and a half or more ago and said we are willing to give up direct payments. That was a huge deal, and they got zero credit for that. And I don't know any other constituent group that's come forward and said, here you go, here are billions of dollars we no longer need. Some of those savings were rolled back into some programs, but on balance, this is discussions about the 80% of the nutrition, the 80% of the bill that goes to nutrition, essentially food stamps. I think they've got a tacit agreement on that from reading the press, and it's not as much as most of us on this panel would like, probably not as much as any of us on this panel will be satisfied with. There are some lingering questions out there that have to do with actively engaged in farming, and also some lingering questions about dairy, and looks like there are at least 3 contentious amendments that may have to be fought out in a formal conference committee. That's the best I can tell you right now, and no one can quite see into this at this point. The principal negotiators have been very quiet. I have an amendment that I'm very interested in. It preserves and protects the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, and California is seeking to regulate producers in other states. My amendment prohibits them from doing that, and HSUS, whom I not so fondly refer to as the vegan lobby, has spread a misinformation campaign for over a year on my amendment. There's one thing that they say about my amendment that is true. I challenge them to actually guess which one that is. I know.
As far as reform on the Farm Bill, this House made the biggest reform that we could have hoped for in this Congress, and that was when we separated out the food stamps from the Farm Bill. And I'll continue to advocate at our retreat, which hopefully this year will not be a literal retreat, but that we should reorganize our committee so we have a public assistance committee where we can see all of the different kinds of public assistance, all of the food stamp programs, all of the welfare in one place so that we can actually do an efficient job in dealing with those issues without all the redundance and the fraud, waste, and abuse, and then deal with the Farm Bill as a farm bill and not 80% of it being a public assistance bill. That's the biggest reform we could make, and some of us will continue to push for that.
You know, it is hard being poor in this country. If you're a poor single woman in New York City, you spend your entire day going from agency to agency to agency that are not housed in the same place, justifying your poverty in order to get government benefits. It is like a full-time job to be poor in Harlem, in New York City. That's unconscionable. When we have the largesse that this nation has, that we have created a system that is that difficult to navigate for the truly poor, the people who really need that safety net. So we have to concentrate on how to make the delivery of the safety net to the truly poor more efficient, and to weed out of the safety net those who have lost their way in the cultural dignity of work.
One thing I'd like to add as well, and just note it's not being widely reported, but the appropriations, the omnibus bill does fund food stamps. That is contained therein. It's not as part of the 1.1 trillion, but $82.2 billion is appropriated for that function, and which is I think record highest, and which shows a couple things. One is the system's not working well, and number two, the economy is so poor. But I will want to follow up on, and again, I don't know the negotiations or what happening inside, but if we are jettisoning our hard efforts on the House floor to encourage work, which is not just good for taxpayers, it is good for the individual. It is good for families. There are literally 3 million Americans that fit this category. They have no dependents. They are adults. And they're not disabled. They can work. What do we require for them under food stamps? Absolutely nothing. It's unconscionable that we do not ask them of something in that system, and that's a small portion of that. But that is something we pass through the House floor. I sure hope the conferees are considering that, and that does save money. But the policy is more important than the monetary savings, in my opinion.
Just if I could add, Justin made the point that maybe one of our objectives should be to take on crony capitalism in all of its forms. And I would express my personal belief that a good place to start would be the farm programs, which take your hard-earned tax money and then use them either to jack up the prices that you pay at the grocery store or that indemnify others from losses. Good reform of the farm program is to abolish the farm program, in my opinion, and that's a good place to take on corporate welfare.
Okay, let's go down here to the front, and then we'll go to third row in the back next.
Thank you all. Tyler O'Neill with the Christian Post. My question is for the general panel. Representative Jordan mentioned discussing a conservative alternative to Obamacare, and we've also delved into, with Representative Loomis, the idea of addressing the poverty issue. I'd like to hear your responses to Marco Rubio's poverty platform, and whether or not and what a potential conservative response to Obamacare could be.
As far as a conservative alternative to Obamacare, there are a number of proposals out there. American Health Care Reform Act is one of those with a significant number of sponsors. But I'll say, as a sophomore here, after this will probably be the fourth year of a Paul Ryan budget goes through the floor of the House, most of those things never come to a vote. We never bring the bills to the floor. How do you set a vision and a reality if you don't actually bring them to the floor? You can talk about tax reform for 3+ years of how it would invigorate the economy. That's nice talk. And it might help you raise dollars on K Street, but it does not raise the folks, raise their desire, raise their trust in the Republican Party. And whether it's on poverty, whether it's on tax reform, whether it's on Medicaid. A great Medicaid reform would be just give it back to the states. Why don't we try that? Let New York City figure that out. Why do they have to get permission from CMS in Baltimore, Maryland for health care? Take your pick. I think there's plenty of things out there. But if you don't bring them to the floor to a vote and debate, I know it makes some people afraid in this town. I must admit I'm a little biased. I think that's a good sign that if we bring it to the floor, folks say don't bring it to the floor, that means we should. We should have that debate. We shouldn't be afraid of presenting our positive vision. But sitting back on our heels and waiting like we did in 2012, I agree, is a way of snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory.
I think one thing that we've seen from Obamacare is that it's been the greatest illustration we could possibly have of what doesn't work. In fact, it's kind of I think Obamacare is kind of the healthcare version of Snapchat. It's like now you see it, now you don't. Because with the president, he has promised different versions of the health care bill. It lasts about that long, and then the promise goes away of whether it's doctors or the cost or the procedures that you can have, and it's gone. And there's absolutely nothing that you can count on this program for what's delivered. I think my faith has been renewed in young people. The fact that less than a fourth of young people have signed up for it, to me it shows that they understand what a bad deal this is for them when they could pay about $50 a month for a policy before Obamacare. Now it costs, the same policy costs them about $250 a month. So I think this is a positive to illustrate what doesn't work, but we need some very bold solutions, something as profoundly simple as let any American buy any health insurance policy they want anywhere in the United States with no minimum federal requirements. That gives you complete innovation in the health insurance industry, and you get the highest quality, lowest possible price to the greatest number of people. The other thing we could do is provide a complete liability shield over any group, individuals, or companies that want to provide free health care for the indigent. You want to help poor people? Allow competent professionals to have access to do what they want to do. People are in health care because they love people. They care about people. They're healers. Healthcare professionals are wonderful people. The drug manufacturers, the medical device manufacturers, hospitals, they want to help people get better. Why wouldn't we provide a liability shield for any doctor that wants to provide free health care? We assume liability, not them. The drug manufacturer, we assume liability, not them. Medical device manufacturer, we assume liability, not them, or the hospital. So you get the truly needy in, you take care of them, but then the providers don't have to worry about liability. Why not be bold and actually do what will help people? Rather than helping government programs or big business, do what helps people. And I think that's a common thread of what you're hearing among the conservatives here today. We really care about people. We really love people. We want to help them, and we want to embrace bold initiatives that will actually help people's lives.
I would love to see the RSC healthcare bill come to the floor for a debate, not for a vote in its current form, but rather a debate that led to a vote, because it is a solid baseline that can be improved upon through debate. One of the most fascinating debates I've seen while I've been here on the floor of the House, which is usually just talking to the cameras rather than talking to each other, was an actual debate over Obamacare that occurred between, of all strange bedfellows, Bill Cassidy, who is a member of the House, a physician from Louisiana, a Republican, and Anthony Weiner, who at that time was a Democrat member of the House from New York. And they were working their way in a legitimate debate where they were talking to each other about an issue and working closer and closer to an agreement. And when their debate was over, they went to the back of the floor of the House and actually hashed it out. It's one of the few times I've been here that I have actually seen that happen. There are ways for reasonable minds who start here when they talk to each other, even in front of the C-SPAN cameras on the floor of the House, to pull their discussion to some sort of an agreement. We never had that chance with Obamacare. It was an all-or-nothing proposition. It was a crap sandwich, excuse the expression. We can do so much better.
And actually, the president, when he was a senator running for president, had the best idea of the way to approach this. And then he became president and completely abandoned what he promised. It was a good idea. It was to debate all of this, just like Cynthia's talking about, on C-SPAN, on national TV, where people see who is for what interest. That's what we should have done, and that's what I continue to push our leaders, both in the RSC and in our conference. Let's start doing that now. And let America see who's for what. There are so many things in healthcare that need to be fixed. Obamacare created a bigger problem. And one of them, especially those of us that lost the insurance that we liked and hoped to keep, there is no reason in our health care in America that somebody that can't afford insurance has to pay more in cash than an insurance company pays under their deal with a health care provider. These are things we ought to be debating about. Why is it that nobody in America cares to ask, well, how much is this going to actually cost? It's because we don't have competition in America. We could get that. I had a bill that would have worked. Newt Gingrich said, you got to get that scored. Over a year or two later, they still, CBO was interested in protecting their boss, the president, and as we saw after they got woodshedded, and so it never got scored. These are things we can debate. Let America get involved in the debate. The president had a good idea. It helped him get elected, and then, as so many other things, he abandoned it. But we can do this, and we should debate it out where everybody can see who's for what.
Congressman Harris?
Absolutely. You know, I have to tell you, you know, as a physician, I have perhaps a different perspective on it. I have to tell you, the president gives a great speech, but he always sets up the same straw man. Well, what do the Republicans want to do? Return to what it was before? No, no one's talking about that. You know, we didn't have individual tax deductibility before. That's what the Republican Health Care Reform Act calls for. We want to level the playing field between when corporations buy health insurance and when individuals buy health insurance. That wasn't the status quo before. That's what we're calling for. You know, many of us are calling for purchase across state lines. That wasn't the status quo. That's what we're calling for. But before we go anywhere and do anything, we have to stop the bailouts of large insurance companies that this president is talking about. Before we discuss anything else, the worst thing about Obamacare today is that the president is talking about bailing out huge, large insurance companies that get between you and your doctor. That's not what we ought to be doing, and I hope we take action. I hope it's one of the things we discuss at the retreat.
Andy Harris is 1,000% right. He's 1,000% right.
Okay, let's go here. Yes.
I'm Cindy Sain with the Voice of America, and I'm interested in changes to the National Security Agency and surveillance practices. I would like to get your views on what you expect from President Obama's proposals and what actions you think Congress should take.
Do you know what what's the NSA saying about what you've been saying privately about this idea? I'm sorry. We got a lot of cleaning up to do. I mean, it looks like it's time to declare that the only thing that George Orwell was wrong about was the year. He missed it by 30. That it was 2014 the book should have been entitled instead of 1984. But they have done things that we were promised. I wasn't around when the Patriot Act was passed, but I was around when it was renewed, and I demanded that we have sunsets because this was too much power not to have constant checks. And we were assured the things they were doing were not being done and would not be done, and it's time to just rein that all in.
One concern that I have is that it appears, we don't know yet what the president's full proposal will be, but there has been a long-term push from the ACLU and fellow travelers to give a special individual personalized advocate to terrorists before, whether it's the FISA court or an Article III court. I am very concerned that terrorists would have what no other American has, and that's a special advocate for themselves before these courts. That shouldn't be. I don't think that the American people should be disadvantaged and that terrorists should be advantaged by having a special advocate.
I filed a bill yesterday along with Jim Jordan, Jim Sensenbrenner, Peter Welsh, David Price, and others. So it's bipartisan. I believe there are other members of this dais that are also co-sponsors that would require the president to submit with his budget the top-line numbers for all 16 national security agencies. We don't even see that information. We're not asking for their methods. We're not asking them to drill down into their budgets, but we want to see the top-line numbers. We believe the president should provide that. We believe the Congress should see it, and we believe the American people should know how much money as a top line, the 16 intelligence gathering agencies get from the federal government.
And I don't think we should wait for the president's report or wait for him to do something by executive order. This really is in our lap. We need to, as you were talking, we need to get bills to the floor. We need to debate this. I thought when you were talking about the one great debate that happened on the floor of the House, I thought you were talking about the NSA debate. Everybody was present for that, and Justin was on our side on that debate. But I think the Freedom Act is, the last time I checked, had about 117 co-sponsors. And these are bipartisan. That needs to come to the floor. We need to debate that and pass it.
One question I did want to take, we got about 5 minutes left. One question I did want to take from an online questioner. Yesterday, a federal judge in Oklahoma ruled on marriage, and again, this is one of we've seen in a pattern over the last month or so. Do any of you have any comments about this debate as it plays out in the courts?
Yeah, I do. Certainly, the Supreme Court said this was a matter for the states to decide, and I know the Iowa court a few years ago Supreme Court had said that they didn't, in part, basically they didn't see any biological evidence to support marriage being between a man and a woman, and they need some basic plumbing lessons. But the three that came up that year were turned out. This is a state issue, and it's up to the states to define according to the Supreme Court. So for one omnipotent, omniscious, ubiquitous federal judge who is wise beyond his education to make such a declaration about the law, I think requires revisiting by each state and compliance with the U.S. Supreme Court. This cannot continue like one of the Ninth Circuit judges reportedly said that, well, we know we're not doing in accordance with Supreme Court precedent, but they can't reverse all of ours, so we'll keep cranking them out. We got to get back to real law and order, and that includes by judges not becoming God in their place. You know, the joke sometimes has too much realism. You know, how many federal judges does it take to screw in a light bulb? One, they hold it and the universe revolves around them. That stuff's got to stop. We got to get the law back in the hands of the state where it was originally intended in a federalist republic.
It's clear that this is not about a legal agenda. This is about a political agenda. And the president and Eric Holder were very clear when the president came in. He said that he believes that the DOMA law was unconstitutional and he wouldn't enforce it. That's one example of the lawlessness of this president. He's violating his obligation under the Constitution to faithfully execute the laws of the land. He announced to the nation he wasn't going to faithfully execute the laws of the land. And what's interesting is that essentially you have judges citing an unconstitutional act of the president as the precedent for their lawless decision for activism. So we've completely gone askew from what the founders bled and died and fought for, and that was to have a limited government under a written constitution. Not an unwritten, ever-evolving, living letter that becomes whatever anyone wants at any moment, but it actually means something. And isn't it interesting that Obamacare is being played out exactly the way that the activist courts deal with the Constitution? Because Obamacare is this living law that no one knows what it means. It's whatever the president says at a press conference or a tweet or whatever some bureaucrat says. And that's how we're dealing with the law. When you do that, you have a legal constitutional anarchy. My opinion is the legacy of Barack Obama will be of the establishment of lawlessness in the United States. And that doesn't portend well for the future of the United States. That's what we have given the world, is the idea of the fact that all men are under the law, no one is above the law. And when a president decides that he's going to write a law, That sounds a lot like former Egyptian President Morsi in Egypt, who all of a sudden declared that the edicts were, that whatever his edict was not appealable to a court. Whatever he said was law. Well, how is that much different from what we're seeing coming out of the White House today? We're seeing many of the same actions, and now judges are taking their cues from the White House, and that's a very adversarial precedent that's being set for the future of law and security in the United States. And I think, again, when you look at Lech Walesa, the former leader in Poland, who said some weeks ago that the United States has lost its place as the political and moral leader of the world, when you see someone of that stature say something like that, we heard that on our recent trip to the Middle East. We heard that also from another leader in the Middle East who said essentially the same thing. United States, you're no longer relevant on the world stage. We're going it without you. That shows that the age of Pax Americana, where we've been the leader of the world, is over. I don't want to see that. I don't think Americans want to see that. But that's the legacy, I think, of the Obama administration, that they could be putting the period on Pax Americana. And that's a bad legacy to leave.
Rob, one additional follow-up. Obviously, a very troubling decision in which a federal judge has overruled 75% of the voters in Oklahoma, following on a judge overruling the voters of another state, and also ruling that polygamy might suddenly erupt again after a 100-year of not moving forward on that. So I'm very troubled. Still find that the decisions of the court last summer on the issues of marriage were very convoluted and didn't make any sense. There were 4 justices that want to go this way. They claimed that they wanted the states to decide as long as they agreed with them. And this, I think, continues to lend credence to the fact that we have to push forward with perhaps a federal marriage amendment. It's a long sled up the hill. But again, the court has overruled one judge has overruled 75% of the voters in Oklahoma. And as the author of the Kansas Marriage Amendment, we had 77% of the voters. I mean, who is a judge to make that determination? Which is, if you look clearly at the language of the decisions, 5 justices would say that's not what we had in mind. Folks were worried about a slippery slope of what becomes the non-definition of marriage. I think, frankly, we have a cliff where we've tossed traditional marriage over, and activist judges are certainly running with this decision.
Thank you. And finally, since Congresswoman Bachmann brought it up earlier, and since the news this morning was that Senator Rand Paul is joining Snapchat, I'm just curious when all of you are going to be signing up as well.
I'm on Snapchat. That's how I communicate with all my kids every day. It's the pictures of what they're eating at any given moment.
Well, wonderful. Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions in the audience. We thank those of you who tuned in online today, and thank the members of Congress for participating, and thank our chairman, Congressman Tim Huelskamp, Raul Labrador, and Jim Jordan. We'll be back. I think we're tentatively thinking about early February 5th, somewhere in that range. So stay tuned for an announcement, and hope to see you next month. Take care.